We can start this session. So as I said, this session is going to be about relationships and how to debate them. It should take about 1 hour. It might take a little bit longer or a little bit less, depends on if I am clear and if you have any questions or would like to participate. 3 parts to this workshop. So we're going to talk about relationships, what's unique about them and why we want them in general. We're going to talk about love. What is it good for? What part does it play in relationships? And is it good for relationships? Is it bad? Is it inherent? And we're going to talk about different stages that relationships have, the beginning, the middle, and end of relationships, and how breaking relationships down into all of those parts can be helpful to debating them in general. A few disclaimers. First of all, there is more than one way to view relationships. I'm definitely not going to cover all different kinds of relationships and all possible interpretations and views. This is based off of my experience, both with relationships and debating relationships. So I don't mean to claim that this is an exhaustive list. If I don't mention your view on relationships, I apologize in advance, and that does not mean that they're not good. This is in no way a replacement for therapy. What I mean is this is just about debating relationships. I don't mean this in any way to be advice on actual relationships and how to view them in the real world. This is just a breakdown that I find helpful to debating them. That said, there's obviously more than one way to debate relationships, and there's no magic analysis. This isn't to say that, if you do these things and say these words, you're definitely going to win all of the debates, but I think it is a breakdown that's helpful to thinking about relationships in debate and how to debate them. So hopefully all that is clear, and we can go into relationships and why do we want them. So at this point, I'm going to ask you, either watching at YouTube or everyone who's participating here right now, if you want relationships, if you want to share, unmute, or write in the chat why it is that you want relationships. If you want to share, that's fine. I'm just going to continue for now. So I broke down about good relationships, some reasons I think we view them as important, and some unique benefits we can get out of them. So the first is the context of a shared life, and the things that come with that. So the first thing would be a sort of constant sharing of experiences. This means that there is less effort in sharing. Yes, it is one of the ways to having meaning in life. I will get to that. So the constant sharing of experiences means that there is less effort in sharing, and it's automatic, and less fear of irrelevance. What does that mean? It means that I am constantly telling my partner about things that happen to me at work. I am constantly telling my partner about things I am trying to achieve and what I'm striving to do. This means that I know that they care about me, and I don't need to be constantly questioning myself in sharing those happy things, because I'm not asking, do they care enough about me, like I might be doing with other friends. I know that they care enough about me, and it's a more automatic thing, so I'm more likely to do it. It's more likely that I have someone to share in my happiness with on a day-to-day basis. And in addition to that, that means it's also easier for me to be vulnerable. Because the sharing is automatic, even if I don't share, my partner is likely to understand that something is wrong and ask me about it. So if every day I tell them about something that happened at work and today I don't, that is effectively a kind of sharing, and they can ask me what happened, and that makes me feel cared for. This means that I share in the negative things as well, and that gives me a safe space to make mistakes and process negative experience, and have that experience of that doesn't change how you view me, and that doesn't change how you like me, and understand that it's okay. Another thing that a shared life will give us is just a physical sense of security and autonomy. This means that I can take risks with my job and maybe change a career or move abroad for my job or move abroad to places, and I know that I won't be alone, and I know that I'll have the not only psychological support, but the financial and physical support of someone being there for me when I take those risks. That allows me to be who I want to be in general, and gives me that sense of I can try and achieve things. And lastly, being seen and understood. First of all, it's just a psychological need of I have a place and I am worthy and I am not alone. So people can understand me. That legitimizes what I'm feeling. And it's just this need that we have, and it's fulfilling. And also, being seen and understood means that I am getting what I need in order to work through my experiences and work through my feelings, because different people need different things. Some people will complain about something and they want an active solution and advice. Other people would just like a shoulder to cry on. Some people need time alone to work through things. Some people want just like to be pushed or be motivated to do things if they're not doing things or they're unhappy. But my partner knows me well enough to know which of those things I need and will be able to fulfill that need for me in the best way. So these are all consequences of having a shared life and knowing each other to that extent, that are unique to having a specifically shared life and experiencing each other on a day-to-day basis and having that level of commitment. So I'm being asked if things like moving or having big life decisions, do they stand as a conflict of interest between partners? I think that they have the possibility or capacity to be points of conflict. And I think we will address that in just a few short moments. But definitely, they can both be points of conflict and can be sources of security for those kinds of decisions. Moving on from a shared life, another part is extent of commitment. So extent of commitment means that I am someone else's go-to person and I am someone else's my go-to person. And these does two things. It gives me a sense of meaning and importance, like was written in the chat before. So I am important to someone. I am the person someone chooses to come to. I am someone else's sense of security. That gives me a sense of meaning and importance in life that I might not have otherwise or anywhere else. There are many places in which we are replaceable, or it's hard for us to see where we're not. And this is a sort of stamp that says, no, you are one of the, if not the most important person to me in the world. And it also gives me a sense of security when I know someone else will drop everything to be with me. And that if I need them, or I am in need, or I just want to share and maybe positive things, someone else will be there to help me. And lastly, there's physicality. So for most people, and I know not for everyone, but for many and most people, being physical with someone in an intimate way is just a physical and psychological need. And this is sexual physicality, but it's also just giving someone a hug, or having someone to hold my hand, or having the comfort of having someone to lean on or stroke or play with my hair. For many people, the need for human touch is just an inherent thing we learn as children, because the closest that gives us to our security system, which is our parents. And there are many places in which it is acceptable to have that level of physical intimacy. So that kind of physical intimacy is one of the unique benefits of a relationship, and the unique type of vulnerability that comes with being physical. So obviously there can be physical danger or harm. And when you allow yourself to be that vulnerable with a person, that creates a sense of intimacy that's hard to create in other places. And all of these are even stronger when we're talking not about, when we're talking about sexual intimacy, where everything is more raw. So then we ask ourselves, obviously, as was pointed out in the chat as well, these things can also be bad. So I think we can take a look at the flip side of exactly the same things and talk about why bad relationships might be uniquely bad, or why it can be uniquely harmful, and look at those a second. So if we're looking at the shared life, there is a constant togetherness for it. So for example, once some form of negativity happens, it's very hard to take a step back to avoid it. So let's compare to friendship a second. If I have an argument with a friend and I'm annoyed with them and I don't want to hang out with them and I need a second to quiet down, I don't have the same level of flexibility with my partner, because I'm coming home to them, or there's an expectation that I speak with them. And if I decide to take a time out and cool down, maybe they'll get annoyed with me for not talking to them, and the negativity can spiral. It's also true that it can spiral because I experience it every day. So let's say I have a friend with an annoying habit of, I don't know, chewing very loudly. Let's take something that's very banal, right? So I see them once a week, maybe twice a week on good weeks for a meal. And then when I hear them chewing, it's annoying to me, but it's worth it because it's just twice a week. But when my partner does that and I have to experience that every single day, every night, then small things that wouldn't necessarily spiral or have an incredible negative impact on my life do have a negative impact on my life when they happen in such a constant or in such a shared way, or when it's every single day and I can't be flexible about how much I experience it. And another thing that a shared life does, as was also pointed out, was just a lack of autonomy. I can't necessarily make the decisions that would be best for me in a vacuum because they influence another person. So if I have a job offer that's abroad and my partner doesn't support me, for example, then I am not able to take that job offer, and that can be a point of conflict. So while a shared life could give me a sense of security that no matter what happens, someone is there, it can also prevent me from making decisions, specific decisions, because I would be influencing other people. The extent of commitment is also true. So there is also a burden of responsibility. So while I also feel incredibly important to someone, it also means that I have the responsibility to be there for them. So if I am the only person in someone's life and they want to be happy with me right now, or they want to be sad, or they're going through something, I feel like even if I'm too tired, even if I have other things going on, I have to drop everything and be there for them. That also means that there's a stronger weight to mistakes and lapses. So if I have a friend who doesn't understand how difficult a time I'm having, then I'm more forgiving than if it's my partner, who I also expect to understand me more and drop everything. So if they make a mistake, or if I make a mistake within a relationship, there's a stronger weight to it and it impacts our lives more. And there's also the risk of isolation. So because it's easier to share with my partner than with anyone else, because they're a constant, because they're already there, and sharing with other people requires efforts, it's very easy to become isolated and lose the balance between how much time I'm spending with my partner and how much I'm sharing with other people, and having a larger support system than that. So it's sort of a spectrum of the same thing. And lastly, physicality. So physicality, when it becomes an expectation or a chore, it no longer fills that psychological need. So if I am forced to touch someone, or forced to accept their touch because otherwise they might feel bad, or because it's just an expectation within a relationship, that becomes actively harmful, both because it is difficult for me, I don't enjoy it, and that's a constant harm, and also because I'm no longer having that need fulfilled, but also in, again, most relationships, and this isn't true for all relationships, but most relationships which are exclusive, I'm unable to search and fulfill it elsewhere. So once I'm in a relationship, it sort of bars me from getting that. So we can talk a second about how this is helpful to debate, but first I'll ask if there are questions up to this point, then you can feel free to write them in the chat while I take a glass of water. Okay, if more questions come up, you can feel free to write them in the chat as we go along. But this is helpful to debate because debate is a game of trade-offs. Usually you can't have everything. So breaking down what you're trading off makes things easier to compare between. So for example, if you're comparing between relationships and other aspects of life, for example, any debate which has you choose between your career and your relationship, or a family and a romantic relationship, asking yourself, what unique good am I getting out of relationships and can I get it elsewhere, versus what unique bad am I getting out of relationships and am I vulnerable to it elsewhere, is helpful. So in a debate about career versus relationships, you can go back and look at what are the unique benefits I get out of relationships and how can I put that into the debate. Do I think I can get a shared life with other people? And do I think I'm going to fulfill all of those things? And then within comparing between good and bad relationships, you can always be more nuanced and say that the very things that make relationships good can also make them bad. And you can ask yourself, am I getting the benefits of having a good relationship, or am I only getting the things that might make it bad? So if we're looking at a debate about financial security versus love, for example, there was recently a competition which had a debate about marrying rich as opposed to marrying for love. So you can ask yourself, would I be getting more of the positive shared life experiences or more of the negative shared life experiences? Am I more likely to become isolated? Am I more likely to feel like I have to make decisions for this person, or that we are making decisions together and I have a sense of security? What is more likely to happen? And breaking it down into what exactly it is we're comparing is helpful in having more impacts, comparing between impacts and explaining why they're important. But it's also useful for weighing between separate impacts. For example, I can say that if I feel more understood and that I have a sense of meaning in my life, maybe it's worth the isolation. So a claim can be that, yes, but I become more isolated and I only am friends with this one person. But if this one person gives me a sense of meaning and gives me security to take risks in other places that make me feel like me, maybe that's worth it. Maybe it's not, but breaking things down and understanding the different kind of impacts is helpful in being able to compare between them and explain which one is more important. So breaking things down and thinking about the uniqueness of relationships has been helpful to me in explaining those things. Before we move on to love, and specifically the part love plays in relationships, I'm very happy to take questions at this point. So you can unmute or you can, whichever you prefer. Okay, barring that, going to move on. So the next section of this is going to be love and what it's good for. So here I am going to ask you guys a second to write what is love to you and what you think love is. I'm going to give that a few seconds and then I will just fill it in. Okay, so barring answers, I'm going to just quickly put in some of these things. I'm sorry. So gonna share my screen again. So having asked some people what love is to them, I got two kinds of answers. I got kinds of answers that are, they make me feel good about myself, they have a positive impact on my life, or they care for my needs and make me happy. And I have, they just get me, it's an all-consuming emotion. It's when I can't imagine myself with anyone else. And I want to focus on the difference between these two different interpretations of love because I think it's important. If you look at the square on the left, it's things that are inherently positive. So someone making me feel good about myself is an inherently positive thing. If they have a positive impact on my life, if they care for my needs and make me happy, those are all inherently positive. And it means that if I'm talking about love, I am necessarily talking about a positive interaction or something that is good for me. If you look at the square on the right, it's about someone just getting me or understanding me. That doesn't necessarily mean they have a positive impact on me, or that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. If I'm a drug addict and another person is a drug addict and we both understand drug addiction, that doesn't mean that we're impacting each other in a positive way. It just means that they understand me to some level. The fact that it's an all-consuming emotion also doesn't make it necessarily positive. And not being able to imagine myself with anyone else isn't necessarily positive either. So I think that this is important to debate because it's important when we talk about love, or when different people talk about love in a debate, it's important that I'm making sure that I have the same perception of love, or that we're talking about the same thing, both as different teams so we can compare, but more importantly, I want the judge to make sure the judge has the same understanding of love and what it is and how it impacts things that I do. So if I have a perception of love that it is not necessarily a positive, but it's just a form of emotion that's very strong and all-consuming, that means that when I talk about it, if I'm not explicit about why it is I think it's not necessarily good, the judge might have a perception of a good thing. And it'll be less intuitive why I'm talking about love in a bad sense, or something that's not inherently good. Or it could be viewed as a concession if I say, yes, people will feel more love. Now, quick disclaimer here. I think if you separate love from relationships, there are claims to be made that love in and of itself is an amazing feeling, and there are benefits to experiencing it that have nothing to do with relationships. I am separating that claim a second and just talking about what place love has within relationships and how it plays with that. So the first thing to notice is that love doesn't necessarily have to be a good thing. It can also be a negative thing, which brings me to the next question is, why do we fall in love and why do we feel it? So there are many good things to say about why we fall in love. So we can say that when we have a sense of safety and security, we feel like we are in love because it's fulfilling those needs of mine. It fulfills other needs that I have. Sense of being understood. It means someone is taking care of me, maybe also just physically taking care of me. Someone is available to me. So it's fulfilling those needs of mine for interaction, for a sense of understanding, and for just, I don't know, maybe they're taking care of me when I'm sick. And maybe we also have shared values and perspectives. So we enjoy talking about the same things. We view the world in a similar way. I believe they have a positive impact of the world because of the shared values and because of our shared perspective. And that would be a reason for me to love them. And I think that they have a positive influence on me as a person. So I think they make me better. If they're very smart and I feel like I learn a lot from them, I feel like I become a better person when I'm with them. All of these are reasons we fall in love, but we shouldn't ignore some bad reasons that we fall in love. So this is analysis that I have found useful in many debates as a reality check to sort of say, look, it's easy to romanticize love, but here are all sorts of reasons why we would fall in love that aren't necessarily good for us. So the first is repetition compulsion. This is just a psychological fallacy, which means that we're drawn to things that are familiar to us. This means that if I had a distant parent or a verbally abusive parent that wasn't supportive, it doesn't matter that I think it's good or not good. I'm drawn to something because this is what I know. This is something that is familiar. This is something I have learned how to deal with. So unconsciously, I'm drawn to it. So even if it's bad for me, this is what I know, and I'm going to be unconsciously drawn to this person. Another reason is my desire to master previous negative situations. So similar to repetition compulsion, I might put myself unconsciously, of course, again, in situations that were negative for me and weren't good, relationships that weren't a positive. So again, maybe it's a distant parent or a past distant relationship, but now it's not just because it's familiar, it's because I feel like if I make it better this time, I win. So if I have a distant partner, but I manage to change them and make them less distant and more supportive, I am winning, or I am less damaged from the past relationship that I had. So it's a desire to master, but I can't necessarily do that, or it's unsuccessful, or I'm not going to magically change the other person, but it's still why I am drawn to them in the first place. Another reason that's similar is just delusions of grandeur. I want to be a savior. I want to feel like I am so important or so good for someone that I managed to fix them. So maybe I date addicts because I want to be the person that makes them be able to leave their addiction. Maybe I date someone who is a very jealous person or has a tendency to be a little abusive because I want to be the person that manages to change them and make them better. The impact of this is I am actively putting myself into a negative situation with the expectation that if I manage to change this situation, it's going to be a better situation and I'm going to feel good about myself. But the initial part of it is I'm putting myself into a negative situation. And lastly, I don't know about lastly, but another one is self-loathing. So maybe I'm putting myself into situations or falling in love with people who are unavailable because I don't believe that I am deserving of love. Maybe I don't believe that I am lovable in general, and I just decide not to try and put myself in a loving relationship because of that. So again, maybe this has to do with past trauma. Maybe in the past I was told by someone that I'm not worthy. Maybe I wasn't given enough positive reinforcement or love from my parents or other important people in my life. But the outcome is I don't believe that I deserve love. I don't believe that I should be loved because I am a bad person or don't think highly of myself. And therefore I put myself into situations which I am unlikely to be loved. For example, this is why people would marry someone who is unavailable or fall in love with someone who lives on the other side of the world and is unwilling to make changes. So there's no chance that we'll actually be together, but I fall in love with them. And lastly is a sense of boredom or loneliness and a desire for drama. So even if I have nothing going on, I'm just bored, so I'm likely to look for something that will put a spark into my life. Maybe this is dating a bad guy, someone who is into gangs or doesn't run with the right crowd. Maybe this is someone who is not good for me or nice to me. Maybe this is someone who's married and unavailable, but I'm just looking for that drama because what I'm looking for isn't a person, I'm looking for the story around the person. All of these are also reasons that exist and reasons why we would fall in love with people, in the sense that love is a strong emotion or something that draws me to someone really strongly, something that makes me feel like they understand me because they remind me of someone in my past, someone that makes it that I can't imagine myself without this person because they're fulfilling a need, a psychological need for me that maybe others can't. But we could all agree that the outcome or the likely outcome of these reasons isn't happiness or isn't a fruitful and productive relationship. It's me putting myself into a negative situation in which I'm likely to be hurt. And in debate, the question I would like to ask myself is, does the thing that I'm debating lead to good love or bad love, or love for good reasons or love for bad reasons? If there are any questions, then please feel free to give them to me now. So moving on to how does love therefore impact relationships? So in a positive sense, we have the overcoming of negative interaction. So if I love someone and I'm understanding of them and I want to be with them and there's some negative interaction, or we have one argument, or there is something that's not perfect about them, the fact that I love them is likely to make me want to overcome that and be okay with it and make it so that I am willing to stay and put effort into that relationship, no matter, even if that's negative. The flip side of that, if we're looking at the negative, how love negatively impacts, is that I might overlook negative interaction. So it's not about noticing it and overcoming it, it's about overlooking it. This is when, if someone is abusive to me, if someone ignores me, if someone doesn't fulfill my needs, if someone is toxic, if someone constantly makes me jealous or tries to prevent me from interacting with other people, because I love them, I'm also likely to be okay with that and overlook those things despite them being bad for me. So when we're looking at how I deal with negative interaction within a relationship, I always want to be thinking about the spectrum between overcoming and overlooking, and claiming where I think things fall between those. It's the same for overcoming difficulty. So similarly to overcoming negative interaction, if I love someone, I want to stay with them and I'm willing to put in the work in order to stay with them. It means that if I have received criticism for them, I am willing to make changes to want to be with them, and I'm willing to put in the effort. The flip side of wanting to stay with someone is dependency. So this is where, even if things are really bad, or even if someone isn't making the effort for me, I can't imagine my life with anyone else, and I can't imagine myself with anyone else, and therefore I am dependent. This means that you're not likely to overcome difficulty. This means that people are likely to abuse the fact that you can't leave them. And this has a negative impact on a relationship. Or alternatively, you also think someone is dependent on you and you're less likely to put in the effort to overcome difficulty. And this also brings us to a willingness to compromise. So often when I love someone and their needs are different from mine, say I want to live in a city and they want to live in a small town, or if I want to send my children to a religious school and they want to not send their children to a religious school, all sorts of issues and conflicts that may come up between partners. When you love each other, you are also willing to compromise because you have the shared interest of staying together. Alternatively, love can lead to self-sacrifice, where you constantly aren't necessarily compromising, but you're sacrificing your desires, not communicating about them and changing them, but sacrificing your needs and wants for the other person because you love them. And I think looking at all of these positive and negative impacts, one after the other, leads to the question, does love in this debate lead to a good balance, lead to the good impacts, or does it lead to the bad impacts? Or where are we striking the balance between the two? To give an example, how is this helpful to debate? Just to sum up, what we should be asking ourselves about love in the debate is, what is love in the first place? Ensuring that we're talking about the same kind of love as the judge is perceiving and as other teams are. And if we're not, using it as a reality check for other teams, being nuanced about what love is and explaining that it can have two sides and why we're emphasizing one side over the other. We're also questioning what impacts the debate has for each kind of love. So are we emphasizing falling in love for good reasons or for bad reasons, and how that love is impacting relationships within the debate. So, for example, this is a debate that I debated last year. I'm going to briefly read the info slide. So, Cupidon is a technology that allows two adults to ignite feelings of love for each other in themselves, assuming they both opted in. It can be used more than once, and these feelings can fade over time or last just like in any romantic relationship. And this house prefers a world in which Cupidon is widely accessible. So, disclaimer, I think that this motion is probably gov biased and a little unbalanced, but I think that the gov cases here really emphasize the different kinds of love and what the situation is in which I want to create feelings of love towards someone. And I think when I have to create those feelings, that's exactly where I question, maybe it's because I want to stop loving someone that is bad for me. And this is where going into what the reasons I fall in love for in the first place are and when I would need to fake them. So maybe I have a tendency to fall in love for people who are distant or unavailable or far away because of all of the reasons we discussed. And I want to help myself feel that for someone else and to compel myself to love someone that is better for me. And I think that here, emphasizing the reality of why we fall in love and why we need a strong force to help us imagine ourselves with someone else is very helpful to deepening gov's cases, because you can explain in detail what are reasons why that might not happen, what that leads me to do within a relationship and what we're trying to achieve. And why compelling myself to love someone is going to be helpful to achieving a better relationship within that. And this is generally how I think we can view love in a nuanced way that is helpful to deepening analysis within a debate and speaking about it in a more nuanced way. Are there any questions about this section, about love in relationships in general? Yes. So the question here is, the analysis is opposed, but can be used to explain the same situation. So how do I weigh between them? So weighing these, the slide is overcoming versus dependency. So this slide, how do you weigh between them? So I think how I would go about incorporating these into a debate is explaining what I think a specific motion does in terms of the balance between these things. So I want to strike a balance. I want to overcome negative interaction, but I also want to have boundaries to make sure that I'm not overlooking negative interaction. So I'm not necessarily weighing between them because I think it's intuitive to say that I want the positive interactions. I want to overcome without overlook. I want to overcome difficulty without being dependent. I want to compromise without sacrificing. The question within a debate is explaining why we're getting more of one as opposed to the other. So thinking of a relevant motion, going back, for example, to, we can ask ourselves, so a motion I'm going to use later is this about the narrative of sacrifice, of love inherently being about sacrifice. We can ask ourselves which of this it emphasizes more. Does it lead to me being able to overcome a negative interaction because I accept it as part of love? Or does it lead me to overlooking other forms of negative interaction that I should be putting boundaries on? And I think thinking about that as a spectrum within the debate, that debate can help me understand what it is exactly that I'm trying to prove. It's not just saying that it will lead to more positive interactions or will lead me to sacrifice. It's explaining why that's important. It's important to overcome difficulty. It's important to overcome inevitable negative interaction. It's important to be willing to compromise. And you're not necessarily weighing between them as opposed to just trying to prove that one of them is happening more than the other. I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to write more to me. Meanwhile, I'm going to continue. So I want to talk a little bit about the different stages of a relationship and why they're important and how they can also be helpful to incorporate within a debate. So I think we can talk about broadly 3 different stages of a relationship. So you have entering a relationship, you have staying in a relationship, and you have leaving a relationship. And we can talk about different characteristics and the impacts each of those have. So when entering a relationship, what we're trying to achieve is, you want to enter good relationships and you want to avoid bad relationships. So the characteristics of when you're entering a relationship is, first of all, you're making a change from the status quo. So I am not in a relationship. This means my life is a certain way, and to enter into a relationship requires me to change that situation. I also have a limited amount of information. This is because when we're just meeting people, we're usually still acting, and then there's a certain amount of presentation of how I'm presenting myself. So I'm going to maybe be less cynical or I'm not going to talk about specific things like my plans for the future, if I want to get married or don't want to get married, because it's just not accepted to talk about those things at the beginning of a relationship. And I also have a lack of shared experience with the person. So it's very hard for me to know how someone is going to react to hardship or react to discomfort when I haven't seen them experience that. It's also going to be hard for me to know how we interact in specific situations. For example, how we solve conflict when we haven't experienced conflict together yet because it's the beginning. So there's just a limited amount of information that I have, and there's a certain amount of excitement. It's fun. I'm getting to know someone new. Things are new. Everything, I'm curious about everything. Everything is a new interaction. I'm learning new things, and that creates a certain amount of excitement. How does this impact this stage of relationships? So first, it's an active choice I need to be making that requires effort and adjustment. So maybe it's hard for me to enter relationships if I'm not used to it, because this is new. I need to make changes. I need to maybe see my friends a little less so that I can see this person more. Maybe I'm not always sleeping in my own home. Maybe there are societal expectations that are different and I need to adjust. There's also a certain amount of risk that's involved. Because I don't know enough about this person, and because I have a little limited amount of information, then making the choice to enter a relationship involves risk. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe things won't work out, maybe I'll discover things about them that are bad, or that means that we're incompatible. But also, judgment is impaired because of the excitement, and because I want it to work out, and because I feel interested and I want to experience more and more and more of that, and I don't want that to go away. I want to be optimistic, and I want to be swept up, and I want things to succeed. So how is this useful in a debate? I think, first of all, it's easy to prioritize because of this requiring change versus inertia that we'll see in other points of a relationship. It's easy for me to say that it's just easier to intervene before the fact. It's easier for me to intervene to make sure that people only enter good relationships than it is for me to intervene to change relationships that already exist. Because when they already exist, that's when it requires more effort to change. As opposed to just not entering the relationship, it's easier to intervene then. So I can prioritize it that way. I can also claim that it's critical. So it is critically important that we intervene at this stage, because judgment is very difficult. I'm excited. I want to enter this relationship. I want to experience more and more and be swept up in this. Because it's so actively hard to make good decisions at this stage, it's crucially important that we emphasize it and that we intervene at this stage to prevent those bad decisions that would be likely made otherwise. And we can also just claim logical priority. There's no reason to sustain relationships unless we enter good ones. So if we show that we have a positive impact on how people decide whether or not to enter a relationship, that means that that's more important, or that's prior to whether we want relationships to succeed or not. Because A, we're making it more likely that they succeed in the first place, and B, we don't want to sustain relationships that are bad. So I think thinking about those characteristics and how to prioritize this stage could be helpful in talking about debates where things impact this in a specific manner. This leads us to during a relationship. So when I am in a relationship and I want it to succeed and I want it to be a good one and not deteriorate, I want to emphasize the good things and mitigate the bad. So if we look at characteristics of being in a relationship, we can talk about the depth of it. So like we were talking about the characteristic of a shared life, and that means that things are a constant. It means that someone knows me very well. It means that we are experiencing each other on a day-to-day basis. It means that we have gone through a shared history together, and that leads to comfort. So there's a certain depth in that kind of interaction that I have that is different from the beginning of a relationship in which there's less depth. There's also a lot of inertia. So I'm already in a relationship, and the change that I need to make is it to not be in a relationship as opposed to yes, be in a relationship. So I'm already in it. And there's a certain amount of routineness to it. Things are just happening on a day-to-day basis, and they're less exciting. So there's more security in that, but also there's less excitement, and that's something that we need to address within a relationship. So the impact of that is extremity of impacts. This is the stage where having a shared life means that we can spiral either into negativity or spiral into positivity. For example, if my partner doesn't wash their dishes every single day, that is a more extreme impact on me when I'm in a long-term relationship than when I am not in a relationship or just at the beginning of one, because it happens every single day. Or if every single day my partner doesn't comment or give me positive feedback, that has a more negative impact on me. In opposition, if every single day I have someone that says good morning to me, and every single day I have someone that tells me that they love me, the positive impact on my life given that is also very, very big, because it gives me that sense of security and meaning no matter what on a day-to-day basis. It also means that I have to overcome larger obstacles and compromise on a more day-to-day basis. Because of the depth of our connection, because things are already happening, it means that first of all, small conflicts become larger. So things like who's doing more work at home and who's washing the dishes and the comfort levels of each person become larger things. So I wrote larger obstacles, not just because they're inherently larger and big things like moving somewhere and taking a new job or taking risks with joint money. It's also just day-to-day things that wouldn't be large in other contexts become large within this stage of a relationship. And that leads to just a necessary amount of communication. If you feel like you want some more excitement in your life and you need to do it, you need to communicate that and talk about it. And sometimes because things are routine, that becomes a harder thing to do. How is this useful in debate? I think you can prioritize the extent of impact. So because things are day to day, even if you talk about small things, and even if you talk about small decisions that you need to make within a relationship, they become very, very big, because small amounts of discomfort over a long period of time become incredibly bad or incredibly good. You can think about it as a form of a torture where you have like small water dropping on your forehead every second. So it's not a horrible discomfort, but because it's happening a lot and is a constant, it's a very large impact. So you can claim that this is the stage of a relationship where you have the most impact on each other. So making this stage of the relationship better has the largest amount of positive or negative impact on people. You can also talk about why the critical interference actually happens here. So changes to routine are hard. And once you fall into a rut and once you fall into negativity, you can spiral into there. So it's important that we intervene here and emphasize that you should and can communicate and change things during a relationship, because otherwise it's very hard to do. And lastly, you can claim logical priority to this stage by saying that if you can ensure relationships are good after the fact, you don't need necessarily to be careful upon entering them. The claim to make here is that you can't know if you're entering a good or bad relationship because of the inherent lack of knowledge. So all you can do is try to make sure that people are behaving within relationships in a way that is helpful to making relationships better. And that's why you don't need to be so careful if within relationships, people are doing things that make the relationship good. And lastly, there's ending a relationship. So here, I think what is intuitive to emphasize is the ability to leave bad and abusive relationships. And I think the characteristics here of leaving a relationship and why it's hard are several. So you can talk about sunk cost and inertia. First of all, inertia is just the fact that you're already in a relationship and it's hard, but also sunk cost. You've probably put a lot of effort into this relationship. You've probably sacrificed things and given up on a lot of things. Maybe you have been less in contact with friends. Maybe there was someone else you liked and you chose your partner over them. Maybe you have had to move. Maybe you spent money on this person. There are a lot of reasons for you to want this to succeed, to justify your past decisions. So it's hard to make that decision. There's also a lot of risk and fear. So I know what it's like, even if I'm not happy. I know what the reasons that I'm not happy are now, and I have probably developed ways of dealing with them and making sure they become better, as opposed to if I leave that relationship and I'm scared, I don't necessarily know what's going to happen. Maybe it's going to be worse, and there's a certain amount of just uncertainty that makes it scary. And there's a lot of guilt and pain and anger. So I feel guilty for maybe breaking up. I am causing pain. Even if I'm doing the breaking up and I love someone, I'm also going to experience pain because I miss them or I wish things were different. And I'm going to have to deal with anger and people being angry with me. And all of these things lead to it being hard to end a relationship, or the end of a relationship being very difficult. The impact is that the fear is very large, and this also interacts with dependency. So the stronger dependency and isolation are, the larger the fear is. And maybe this can connect back to the question of how to weigh between things. So we can emphasize just how bad dependency and isolation are by explaining why they make it crucially difficult to leave really bad relationships, and can try and weigh those that way and explain why having a large amount of dependency is worse than not having and not being willing enough to make sacrifices, or that being more difficult, because not being able to leave a relationship that's bad is very bad. There's also a strong risk of security and loneliness. So this requires support systems and optimism. So this also circles back to isolation. So the more isolated you are within a relationship, the less likely it is that you are willing to risk that loneliness. Because it becomes hard to imagine your life. It's better to have someone than have no one. And there's often a lot of societal judgments. So maybe you're breaking up a family, maybe you're breaking someone's heart. All of those things mean that it's difficult. It's useful in debate in several ways. First, I think you can prioritize it in two ways. You can talk about the incredible harms of staying in a bad relationship. And you can also talk about opportunity cost, in that it's difficult for people to view what it is that they will be achieving by leaving this relationship. But if you can analyze what a good relationship would look like and how people are likely to get it, then you're also losing that. So there's also an opportunity cost here. And you can also claim critical interference. So difficulty in taking this step for all of these reasons means it's important we emphasize and allow people to take it, because this is what's going to be most impacted by things. So I want to walk through a motion from this year's Euros and explain why it was helpful in that motion. So the motion was, this house opposes the narrative that love is about sacrifice. The motion itself, disclaimer, was about love in general, about love, familial or romantic, but I want to focus a second on romantic relationships and how it impacts that. So upon entering relationships, Gov can claim that you're more likely to enter bad relationships because you accept negative impacts and take larger risks because sacrifice is okay. On side opposition, you want to claim that sacrifice is a necessary part of relationships, so you're more likely to enter good ones that otherwise you wouldn't. If you break down what the characteristics of entering a relationship are, you can deepen the arguments on both sides. So on government, if you recognize status quo and that it requires changing the status quo is an issue, by understanding that that's a characteristic of this stage of relationships, you can explain why there are reasons people would be willing to change the status quo anyways, but we want them to take the time to do that and not jump to sacrifices because that's a bad thing. On op, you can claim why changing the status quo for love specifically is very hard, and we need to counteract that by motivating sacrifice of change. And if you don't sacrifice, you have fewer people to choose from, so you're less likely to find someone more harmful. I think here, going through the characteristics of entering a relationship and recognizing status quo or recognizing lack of information as characteristics of that stage will allow you to crystallize your arguments and explain how you're engaging with those specific characteristics in a nuanced way. If we want to look at the maintaining relationship stage, so government can claim obviously that you make sacrifices that are too big, so you get too worn out. Whereas opposition want to claim that sacrifice is necessary on a day-to-day basis, and without it, we can't maintain relationships. So breaking down again, the characteristics of maintaining a relationship can deepen arguments on both sides. For example, Gov say that in order to overcome day-to-day challenges, we need to communicate them to work together. The narrative of sacrifice means that I should suffer through and I shouldn't communicate them, so I get more frustrated with them, or I get more frustrated when my partner is less willing to suffer through them. So crystallizing and understanding the day-to-day challenges and how big those impacts are and the criticalness of communication there helps me to identify exactly what is getting harmed by this narrative and explain exactly why during a relationship it's making it difficult. On opposition, I want to say that there are sacrifices and hardships that are inherent to a relationship, and it's constantly trying to change them that wears you down. And because without the narrative, you're more likely to complain as opposed to be understanding or view difficulties in a negative light, it makes it harder to work through and overcome them. So again, recognizing the day-to-day challenges and what it's like maintaining a relationship in that way is helpful to crystallizing those arguments and explaining exactly where they interact with what you need to do to make that successful. And lastly, on ending relationships. So here, I think that broadly governments want to claim about the narrative leading to people not leaving abusive relationships, whereas OP don't have, in maybe you can, I think it's less intuitive for OP to claim that this narrative will lead to more people leaving relationships. If you have that analysis, then you're super talented and great, and please teach it to me. I just think it's less intuitive. So OP want to claim that it leads to more people entering good relationships. And if you break down what the stages of relationships are in the first place, that can deepen arguments. So Gov can talk about the likelihood of entering good versus bad relationships in each world. So you're likelier to be in a bad relationship, and that emphasizes the importance of leaving them. And they can prioritize having bad relationships as opposed to promoting good relationships by comparing the unique advantages and harms. So if you circle back to what we were talking about, the unique harms and unique advantages of being in a relationship, government can use that to explain why leaving a relationship is more important. Whereas OP can explain why, can use the breakdown of the stages of relationships to explain why, if you're improving relationships across the board, if you're ensuring people enter good relationships, if you're ensuring people are better at maintaining relationships in a good way and preventing them from deteriorating into bad relationships, then it's less important that you help out specifically the people that are leaving bad relationships because you're creating less of them. So breaking down what the stage of relationship is that we're talking about can lead to recognizing, crystallizing arguments and utilizing analysis about unique harms and benefits of relationship or the unique functions of love within a relationship at each stage, crystallizing and using those in the best way possible to deepen your arguments and make them more compelling. And I think it's the collection of all of these things and the questions I ask myself when I get a debate about relationships. That is, what are the unique harms or benefits that I'm getting? What part is love playing on each side of this debate? And at what stage of the relationship do I think this is impacting people? Has helped me a lot in understanding how to debate relationships and how to make my arguments deeper, more compelling, both against the other side, but also as top half or bottom half, making sure that I'm hitting all of the different spaces or that I am recognizing potential holes or a potential stage of a relationship or a potential aspect of love that my opening house didn't necessarily engage with, that allows me to go in and engage with it better. So that's it about relationships. I will give a few more minutes for you to just ask questions at this point. There can be a Q&A if you have any, and if not, just thank you for joining me. And that's it. Okay, so I see a question. So it's true that we want to be on the safe point of the spectrum. So we want to show that we can overcome a fight, but we're not so dependent to a point that is toxic. But it's different from human to human and relationship to relationship. Do we generalize them in a debate? If yes, how? And if no, then how to approach debates like I talked about? Because when the narrative about love is sacrificed, there can be countless possibilities. And an additional strategy. So I'm going to engage with that question first. So I think that it is very, very true that debates change from place to place and that it is very dependent on the debate. And there can be countless possibilities. I think that it is difficult to engage with every single possibility within a debate, and it's going to change. So if I'm having a debate about the narrative of sacrifice and love, or if I am having a debate about arranged marriages and the likely success of arranged marriages, the things I'm going to claim are different, and I'm going to want to emphasize different advantages, and I'm going to want to emphasize different harms, and I want to emphasize the likelihood of them differently. It also depends on context. I think the questions I ask myself, or the different analysis I've talked about, it's not that all of it is helpful for every single debate, or that I say all of it in every single debate, but it helps me crystallize what it is that I'm trying to prove. So specifically, your question is about dependency versus overcoming fights. It's going to change from debate to debate, and I just having in my brain the fact that I want to make that nuanced distinction is helpful to me to figuring out where to analyze or where to focus my my attention within a debate. And about generalization from person to person, I think there isn't a choice. So yes, I think I broadly want to generalize that things will have impact X on most people. Now, I think in order to basically in any debate, some amount of generalization is necessary because I'm trying to make broad claims about a large amount of impacts. So I think if we want to generalize in a debate, we can talk about some mechanisms that are universal or that are joint for a lot of relationships. So if I look back at the things we talked about that are unique to relationships, the constant sharing of experiences might vary slightly from person to person, but is generally accepted as part of a relationship. You're going to share your life with someone. Like I said before, there are different ways of viewing relationships, and that's not true for everyone, but for the large majority of the world, a shared life is something that you're going to get in every relationship. The extent of commitment is also something that is expected from most relationships. And you can talk about that as something that is just generally accepted. And the physical aspect of relationships is also generalizable. So I think if the question is how you generalize, you look at those aspects of a relationship that are mostly universal. Now you're going to miss a certain amount of people because not everyone lives their lives exactly like that, but it is descriptive of most relationships that exist, most relationships that people strive for in the world, and therefore you can generalize using those. And then you take a specific motion and ask yourself, given its impact on each of those qualities of a relationship, how do I think it will affect my ability to overcome versus dependency? So if I think that a specific motion causes imbalance, for example, if I'm looking at motions about arranged marriages, and I think that there is an inherent asymmetry of power there between two people within a marriage, then I can talk about how having a constant sharing of experiences in that case is more likely to lead to spirals of negativity than it is to lead to a sense of security, because there's someone who just can't leave and has to constantly experience those things. If I think some motion is going to cause people to rush into relationships, for example, if there's a motion about the narrative that love is a goal in the world, then I can claim that it makes people rush into relationships. And when I look at the universal aspects of relationships, it means that I am going to get more negative interactions out of that shared life. It means that I am out of that shared life. On the flip side, I can talk about extent of commitment and the sense of importance it might give me. So maybe the alternative, if I'm going back to arranged marriages, maybe the alternative is not having that person at all. And I want to err on the side of giving people that person in a sense of meaning, because otherwise they just won't have it. So I think when I want to generalize, I try to look at what are universal claims I can make about relationships, and that's how I would do it. Now, the additional strategy question was, is it more strategic to explore more possibilities, or should we go for characterizing the debate in a way that helps our case and then debate on that specific characterization? The answer to this is, once again, it really depends on the debate, and it depends on what house you're in, and it depends on what strategy works for you. So I think having all of these ways of looking at relationships and thinking about whether it impacts the beginning, the middle, the end, whether it impacts love in a positive or negative way, how does that interact with the stage in a relationship we're in, it gives you a lot of options. But whether or not you want to think of all of those options, or you want to choose one of those options and prioritize it, is up to you and how you choose to debate. So if you're in first house, maybe what you want is to cover as much ground as possible, and then you want to explore more options. If that's a strategy that works for you. Alternatively, you might want to take a look at which of those you think is most greatly impacted by the debate and analyze it in all of its aspects, and take what experiences or what unique advantages to relationships it's giving you, the specific impacts love have on it, and the different stages of those relationships. So say it's really usually very intuitive and easy in a debate to prioritize the impact on abusive relationships because the impacts are very, very clear. So maybe what you want to do is take abusive relationships and explain at each stage how it's impacting those relationships. But I think what this analysis or breakdown of relationships is meant to give you is more here is a lot of possibilities or ways of looking at the debate, which might be useful. And the decision between using all of those and choosing one and prioritizing it is up to you and up to the debate. I hope that that answer was clear and not long and unclear as well. But obviously, if I haven't answered your question fully, please let me know. Are there any more? Can I discuss about a specific motion if I have some time? Sure. Are there any specific motions you would like me to walk through? Okay, let's see. The motion we have here is scientists have developed a romantic sorting hat that has profiled all humans. The profile exclusively assesses temperament, life goals, and sexual chemistry to identify my statistically ideal partner. The hat only discloses the match to me. On my 25th birthday, the government grants me a single use of that hat. This house as a 25-year-old would use the sorting hat. Okay, so we can break this down in terms of the stuff we talked about. Just pulling it up here. So I'm going to share it again. What this hat is giving me is it's making it so that I am disclosing my statistically ideal partner at the specific age of 25. So what do we think this means about I'm going to ask myself a few questions. First is, what do I think this means about how I'm falling in love and why I'm falling in love with people? Do I think that it's going to be the good reasons, or do I think that it's going to be the bad reasons? So it assesses temperament, life goals, and sexual chemistry. But does it take into account repetition compulsion? Has it assessed temperament and taken into account that maybe temperament is compatible because it's familiar to me and not necessarily because it's good for me? I think that would give, if I'm up in this debate, I think it would give me an advantage because it's sort of built up to be that this hat will necessarily give me someone that is good for me. But if you can question that and add reasons why it might still match me up with someone who won't necessarily be good for me, I think that makes it question how good an idea it is in the first place, or how different it is from me as a 25-year-old choosing on my own. Alternatively, I can use this as government to claim that without this hat, I'm more likely to choose people that fall under the bad reasons for falling in love than the good people, because the hat is taking into account things that I, as a 25-year-old, aren't taking into account and I'm not aware of. So I think the first thing I would ask myself is how this compares to how I fall in love in general and what is more likely to happen. And given that, I would then ask myself, which part of a relationship is it affecting most? Or which part of a relationship is it affecting most? And I think here it's pretty intuitive to say, first and foremost, it's how I enter a relationship. So am I more likely to enter a relationship that is good for me and make that change in the status quo based on limited information? Or am I more likely to, or is it more likely to impact down the road? And I think here you can make two claims. A, that you're more likely to enter into a relationship because you are getting rid of the risk involved, or you're at least mitigating the risk involved. So people who wouldn't get into a relationship because they're not sure now have a sorting hat. And that sorting hat means that it's telling you that you're compatible. So you're mitigating the risk. Now, whether or not that's a good or bad thing, and also whether or not it's a good or bad thing compared to without the hat, I can ask myself, given what I think it impacts it has on love, and and whether or not I think entering a relationship is a good or bad thing. And then when I'm asking myself about the unique benefits as opposed to unique harms, I can ask myself, compared to someone who's just choosing on their own, do I think I'm getting more of these things or less of these things? So I can compare it to someone choosing on their own and whether I think more people would make a commitment at a younger age, for example, and if I think that's a good or bad thing. Is it good that we just have more people in relationships in general and more willing to take that risk because they're getting all of these advantages? Or do I think that because of the way that this is happening, because I am I don't have a choice but to now be with that person, I'm likely to spiral into negativity or feel that I can't make decisions that are better for me or feel like I should prioritize this relationship. So those are my first thoughts and how I would sort of use this structure to think about this debate. I think then we can go further and talk about how it would impact during a relationship. So during the inertia and routineness, how do I relate to that, given that I think this person is effectively my soulmate, right? Given that, am I more likely to complain about them and not complain, but communicate my needs because I feel like they would be receptive because they want the same things I want? Or would I be less likely to communicate them because I am supposed to believe that this person was meant for me? How does this mean I interact with overcoming larger obstacles and compromise? Does this mean that I am more likely to compromise for them because we were meant to be and we're supposed to be compatible, or less because they're supposed to be just perfect for me? So I think this is how I would use the structure and the specific questions we walked through in this kind of debate. There's a lot more to say on this motion for both sides. I can think of more things for Gov and more things for Op, but I think that's how I would start to make use of thinking about what kind of love this is giving me, how I'm relating to this at the beginning of a relationship and during a relationship, what kind of advantages or disadvantages I'm getting out of relationships, given that this is how I entered them, etc. I hope that was helpful. Good, I'm happy that it was helpful. Are there any more questions?